need any introduction. You're so amazing and very wonderful with your time for YDS and DSA. So let's give them a round of applause.
Can you? Oh, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Indeed. Make it sound like Luther Vandross. I might sing a song like that. No, but as you know, I'm here for a conversation. I want to begin by saluting Sister Maria. Give her another hand. Sister Maria, give her another hand. We love her. We love her. The same is true with Brother Matt and Sister Beth. Two leaders. We just had a wonderful conversation. Brother Chris, who's the editor of the magazine Democratic Left. But I want to salute each and every one of you for being here. As I said before, I'm here primarily to learn to listen. We don't have a dialogue, Socratic exchange. How has it been so far? You learning some things? You've been touched in your heart, mind, and soul? Because that's what it's about. If you're going to be a democratic socialist or a deep Democrat, you have to learn how to be a marathon runner, a long-distance runner. Don't come out of the block strong, and by the second lap, all of a sudden you got rigor mortis. No. You want to be in it for the long. That's why I want to begin with Sankofa bird. You know what that Sankofa bird signifies, right? That bird who looks back first before to look forward. To the three dimensions of time: the past, the present, and the future. The Sankofa bird is always an implicit critique of capitalist culture, because capitalist culture tends to be ahistorical, loss of memory, obsession with just the present, and the ever repeating moments in the present. Usually a pleasure, money, more pleasure, more money, more power, more position. What's the future? Looks the same. Same pleasure, same money. But when Sankofa, remembrance is one of the reasons why it's so very important to read voraciously. Right? And all of the major texts you can get your hands on to try to account for why we're in such a mess. There's a variety of different traditions you can pull from. There's a Marxist tradition concerned about how capitalism emerged and the asymmetric relation of bosses and workers. You don't have to be a communist to understand the insights of our dear Jewish brother by origin, Lutheran by upbringing, but ending up revolutionary by choice, Karl Marx. And you can talk about Marx explicitly even in a culture that tends to be highly suspicious of any mention of Marx, communism, socialism. You say, no, I am in love with poor people and working people, and I'm going to find any form of intellectual weaponry I can that tries to illuminate their situation. The same would be true in terms of feminist traditions. Simone de Beauvoir. Of course, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Betty Friedan's feminist mystique. But same would be true with Bell Hooks. The same would be true with Sister Gloria, Latino sister, and so many others. Grace Boggs, the Asian sister. And of course, we're not just talking about the sisters reading about sisters. We're talking about the brothers of all colors reading about sisters of all colors. Same would be true to the Black Freedom Movement. The voice ought not be just a name. Read Souls of Black Folk and Black Reconstruction. Read C.L.R. James. Read Manny Marigold, just passed, long time DSA member. That would be true with analysis of homophobia. Our precious gay brothers and lesbian sisters and bisexuals and transgender folks. Sankofa, how do we stay in contact with the voices of the dead so that we can be voices of the present? And of course, I come out of a tradition where my anthem of black people is what? Lift every voice. Can't be a jazz man or a jazz woman. Can't be a blues man, blues woman without what? Finding your voice. But that is a protracted process. culture, superficial spectacle of people so obsessed with titillation and stimulation. You see more copies than you see originals. You see more echoes than you hear more echoes than you hear voices. And you all tell me about the culture of conformity and complacency and inertia and apathy among young folk. Whole lot of sleepwalking going on, right? Whole lot of sleepwalking going on. Oh, you think you're cool? Yeah, then why are you a copy? Why are you original? Why are you an imitation? Well, that's how you be successful. That's the problem. That's the problem. It's not a matter of just being successful. It's a matter of being faithful. What are you faithful to? Sankofa. The best that has been bequeathed to you. Now, I've been blessed to begin with my own parents in Sacramento, California. I began with folk in my church. They were freedom fighters. Now, it's hard to find folk in the church these days who are freedom fighters. Why the commodification of culture goes hand in hand with the commodification of religion. So you end up with market religion, market culture, market education. I'm told Sister Joanne was here, right? Well, she's a powerhouse, isn't she? I've done this for 30-some years. She's keeping track of that privatizing of public education and what it means to marketize and commodify and commercialize education. So what happens? Rich kids get taught and poor kids get tested. They're privatizing in a way of what? Disarming. No access to memory, imagination. Even in Chicago, 684 schools, 202 nurses for 684 schools, 1 out of 4 schools have arts programs. Can you imagine why Sankofa has very little weight among the precious poor folk in Chicago, the poor children in Chicago? Because they even get into schools after going through mental detectors. And what? No arts programs. What is art about? Imagination, creativity, exploration, adventure. Not just taking the next test so they can evaluate the students and see how much money they justify in receiving. Not just a dumbing down, but it's a crime against humanity. That's really what it is. Because believe me, when I was coming along, if I could get to school and stay there, because I had a lot of energy, if I could get to school and stay there long enough, and they didn't have arts programs, I wouldn't end up teaching at Yale. I would end up going to jail, not for political reasons. I would not have found a venue for my rage. I still got a whole lot of rage. But thank God I found a venue for it. Righteous indignation rather than hating others. Moral outrage and holy anger rather than revenge. And that's a good thing, because it is good to be on fire. But we need theorists of the flames as well as folk on fire. And every once in a while, you get both. You get folk who are concerned about the conditions under which people are sleepwalking and need to awake. And you get folk like yourselves that say, I want to be part of the fire. I want to be part of the movement. I want to be part of the motion. I want to make a difference. And for me, most importantly, what inspires me about each and every one of you is that you decide to answer the Socratic question. What does it mean to be human? What kind of person are you going to be in the short move from your mama's womb to the tomb? And you're not here that long. Unless an impending ecological catastrophe hits, all of us will not be here that long. But no matter what the consequences, no matter what the projections, the time that you are in space and time, you have chosen to remember the best, to have a reverence for life, human life, sentient life, and to resist and to try to make the world a better place. And you're not doing it because you want to make a lot of money or find a lot of pleasure, but you will find great joy. And always find joy in struggle. So much of American culture is a joyless quest for pleasure. A whole lot of pleasure going on, not a lot of joy at all. I'm not talking about you all's lives, I'm talking about young folk outside this room. But that's real. Because you need joy in order to make your trek from mama's womb to tomb with any sense of meaningfulness. Not just feeling good about yourself, but also being faithful to something bigger than you. This is why the issue of morality is so very important. And I would even add spirituality as a Christian. But as you can imagine, I'm a pretty idiosyncratic, iconoclastic, self-styled Christian. Most of my fellow Christians in America, they don't recognize me as a Christian. I say, well, magnificent, in the name of Jesus. That Jesus going into the temple and running out the money changers as soon as he got to Jerusalem. That's not a Jesus they want to deal with. The same would be true, of course, with Hillel, Amos, Isaiah, with my precious Jewish brothers and sisters of Muhammad, bringing together all the different folk together in Mecca. But my Islamic brothers and sisters, or with Buddha, or with Confucius, or with my atheistic or agnostic brothers and sisters like Brother Bill Maher, he got a heart of gold. He's just a militant in his atheism. I tell him all the time, the God you reject is not the one I worship. Everybody's got to be atheistic about a whole host of gods, even if you're religious. But in the end, it's about what you're willing to spend your time and energy for. And to be a deep Democrat is simply to say that every individual has moral significance. Everyone. And to really believe that, to take seriously what the great Jane Austen called constancy, which is moral consistency, which may, lo and behold, a precious baby in Newtown, Connecticut has the same value as a baby on the south side of Chicago, or in the barrio, on a reservation in Wisconsin, or in Pakistan, or in Somalia, or in Yemen, or on the West Bank, or Tel Aviv, or Ethiopia. You say, oh, Brother West, that's just simplistic formulations. No. If you really believe that, it's going to pit you over against the powers that be. It's going to pit you over against the status quo. No matter what color the powers that be are. And that's where the issue of who you are. Do you have the courage to be constant and morally consistent with a sophisticated political analysis that tries to leave the world a little better for those friends called the wretched of the earth? And in the end, of course, it's a question that each of us have to answer in the dark precincts of our own soul. What cost are we really willing to bear? How far are we really willing to go? And thank God that the progressive movement doesn't require martyrdom. I'm sure if somebody had said, come to the Young Democratic Socialist Conference to become martyrs for democratic socialism. How many of you all going to show up? I don't think too many. I understand. Thank God that's not the case. Now, some of us are willing to die. Some of us are going to die. Some of us have been living under death threat for 25, 30 years, so get used to it. Yes. But that ought not be the norm. That ought not be the norm. I used to talk with my dear brother Michael Harrington. You all been reading Michael Harrington? Give him a hand in absentia. Give brother Michael Harrington an absentia. We love you, brother Mike. We love to get you, brother. He used to talk about the death threats because he was always on TV and radio. He talked about socialism at that time. Talking about socialism, I was like talking about you on intimate terms with Joseph Stalin, because Americans have an illiteracy when it comes to left-wing politics. Every time you say socialism, oh, you must be a communist. Now I'm pink, not red. What's the difference between pink and red? We got deep democratic identities with libertarian sensibilities. So rights and liberties mean something to us. Rights and liberties in Venezuela mean something to us. So we can love Brother Chavez and say, you're going to protect rights and liberties even of the conservatives there, because we're democratic socialists. Oh, with that kind of politics, you might not be able to become hegemonic on the left. We're not concerned with being hegemonic if we have to give up our fundamental allegiances and identities and moral sensibilities. We have an institutional sense of who we are as a group, as a collectivity. So we might be marching next to a whole host of folk. I spend a good time with communists. I said, Brother West, we know that you're so critical of the history of communism. Absolutely right. How come? Because I'm a deep Democrat, I'm a democratic socialist. I want to be true to who I am. But at the same time, if I'm able to march with neoliberals in the Democratic Party who can support foreign policy that generate dropping bombs on innocent people, and I will march with them on issues of reform within the system. But when we pull back and have coffee and cognac and have a conversation, they say, my God, you sound like a communist giving your critique of imperial power and the American empire. You don't say. That's why we got to be jazz-like, right? You got to be improvisational, true to yourself, disciplined, but also flexible and fluid so you don't get locked into narrow dogma and doctrine, even as you work with a variety of different peoples with whom you have many disagreements. I was blessed to have an interview with Brother Ron Paul on my radio show this weekend. Oh, we went at it. We went at it. It was a beautiful dialogue because I have great respect for him. And he's wrong most of the time. Most of the time. But when it comes to the National Defense Authorization Act, arresting people, detaining people without due process, judicial process, he's hard on that. I am too. We come together. Or assassinating U.S. citizens with no accountability, given imperial presidency, he's hard on that. I am too. Suspicion of Patriotic Act, I'm with you, Brother Ron. Because we have deep commitment to rights and liberties. When he talks about authoritarian side of the state, yes. When he talks about stop and frisk in New York City, you all know about stop and frisk, right? 700,000 young brothers, most of them black and brown and poor. Stopped. 3% of them have any connection to criminal activity whatsoever. Well, that's what we have to enforce the law. Then why is it so that not one executive of a Wall Street bank is going to jail, given all the criminality, the market manipulation, and predatory lending, and insider trading, and fraudulent accounting? It's a criminal justice system that, to me, is still, in too many ways, itself criminal. I've taught in prisons for 32 years, and I've seen the effects of this arbitrary rule of law on so many poor black and brown and increasing white brothers and sisters. And the Marshall Plan that we've spent in the last 30 years, you all know about this. And $1 trillion for jails and prisons, but when it comes to education, you can't find a penny. When it comes to jobs with a living wage, can't find a penny. Decent housing, can't find a penny. Wars in Afghanistan, find big money. Warped priorities. That's precisely the kind of hypocrisy and capriciousness that democratic socialists focus on, analyze, and want to do something about it relative to our local context. And that's where I'm going to stop, because I want to hear from you all in terms of local context. Yes, we're a national organization. Yes, we have debates about what overall policy ought to be, but so much happens on the ground, and oftentimes some of the best stuff happening on the ground is local. It hardly gets visibility, given our cultural superficial spectacle and celebrity crazed culture. Things that don't get on the radar. Oftentimes the best things don't get on the radar. It's like hip-hop culture, isn't it? The best stuff doesn't get on the radar. Not at all. You just get the market-driven, misogynistic, homophobic, posing and posturing artists. Not all of them, but too many of them. You know, Lupe's able to sneak in every once in a while, get his little visibility, and still do his political thing. That brother got courage. Brother Ali's another one. We can go on and on. More technique. Some of the others that I've been blessed to work with. But let me stop now because we're going to have a good hour or so of dialogue. Please, somebody jump in right away. Question, query, what's on your heart, mind, and soul, my dear brother?
The State of the Union. The State of the Union with Barack Obama gave his State of the Union address, you know, following you and Tavis slightly, the poverty tour and all that, and the book and everything. The $9 wage, the preschools, I thought that was a very progressive and open, you know, blew my mind. So, can you talk a little bit what you think, if that is going enough? What more could he do? Your thoughts on that speech as well, how progressive it was, because I know you've been very critical and, you know.
No, I appreciate that. No, I was glad to hear, especially those two. I mean, those priceless 4-year-olds, especially locked into our poor communities, who deserve so much more attention. And Marion Wright Edelman has been pushing that for a long time. And, for him to even trot that out. But keep in mind, as president, you know, you're not just head of the American empire, you're not just head of the American democratic experiment, but you use bully pulpit, you can talk about things and people start talking about it. And so that was very important. Same is true. Ralph Nader's been on this crusade for the last 13 months, right? The minimum wage. I mean, he's talking about 10.25, 10.50. Barack Obama promised 9.50 that he would talk about in 2008. Now he's got 9. That's still making some movement. At least putting it in the public discourse in such a way that people have to debate it, talk about it, and maybe it might awaken some of the politicians in Congress to do something about it. The Progressive Caucus is already behind it, the Black Congressional Caucus as well. Those two are not identical. The Progressive Caucus and the Black Congressional Caucus. They overlap, but they're not identical. Not neoliberal black folk. Not necessarily progressive in that way, you see. So I agreed. On the other hand, of course, what did dear Brother Barack Obama said, and we have fully informed Congress as to what's going on in terms of foreign policy. Quit lying. I don't know how I could even say that. Even a politician, you know, get used to that, they routinize that. It's simply not the case. But pressure on. So there again, the critique on the foreign policy side. But those two I thought was significant, and the fact that he hadn't mentioned the word poverty in 4 years. 0.2% of the campaign, $7 billion in the campaign, $2 billion just for the presidential campaign, and not mention it probably hardly at all. Just to acknowledge that you've got fellow citizens who are getting together in that way with houses underwater, dealing with massive unemployment and underemployment and so forth. But we have to keep the pressure on very intensely. But we agree when we agree and we disagree when we disagree. So, yes?
Well, as a... Thank you. I'm actually a teacher. I teach at the University in Alabama, and I'm an immigrant too. But my question is about, especially going back to the State of the Union again, President Obama is not alone in this, but as in terms of leaders and presidents all over the world, at least the Western world, this stress on sciences and technology. Whenever we talk about education, we frame that within the scientific. And as a teacher of media studies and cultural studies, I always I'm like, when is he going to talk about, okay, what does education mean in terms of teaching critical thinking? And I just wanted you, this is kind of a comment, but I want you to expand on that, please.
No, you were so very right, though. The Greeks have a wonderful word called Paideia, P-A-I-D-E-I-A, that Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and Sophocles and others made much of. And it's a qualitative distinction between deep education and cheap schooling. And cheap schooling is just about narrow skills, gaining access to a niche in the labor force, and then living your life. And even Barack Obama used the language, unfortunately, in the inaugural address. What did he say? What our businesses want out of our students. That's the last conception of education you want in a democracy. That's market education versus democratic education. Democratic education is Paideia. And Paideia is about what? The formation of attention. We live in a culture of mass distraction, right? So we've got to shift from the distractions to attend to the things that matter. That takes courage. And you have to have friends. That's why these gatherings are so very important. You need networks. In college, university, high school, in the community, and so forth. You need to spend time with folk who are not so obsessed with the distractions that they can't attend to things that matter. That formation of attention. And then the cultivation of a self and the maturation of a soul in a community with an attempt to ensure that the community that you're tied to is going to make the world a better place than the conditions that we find ourselves in. And that's what Paideia is at its deepest level. And that's the kind of thing you get, for example, in probably the greatest public philosopher. Who would be the greatest public philosopher American civilization has ever produced? Taught at Columbia for many years, born in Burlington, Vermont, John Dewey. His book, Democracy and Education. His other book, The Public and Its Problems, Individualism, Old and New. He was a democratic socialist. He supported another democratic socialist who went to Princeton in 1905, graduated from Union Seminary in 1911, and lost his Christian faith in 1912. His name was Norman Thomas, one of the great, towering democratic socialists of the 20th century. In fact, when Martin Luther King Jr. received a telephone call, you just won a Nobel Prize. He said, give it to Norman Thomas before you give it to me. Martin, pick up the phone, please, brother. Who is Norman Thomas, please? Ran against FDR 4 times on the socialist ticket. Towering figure. But I mentioned him because, like Dewey, he had a conception of education, critical engagement. Paulo Freire talks about this in terms of what? Conscientization. Miles Horton, one of the great radical educators, founder of Highlander Center. I know you all know Highlander Center. That's what Rosa Parks was shaped. You all know Rosa, right? That's where Martin King would go. This is in Gutbucket, Jim Crow, Tennessee. Miles Horton was a white brother. His mother went to 2nd grade. But he founded Highlander, and he had a cousin in the Klan that would burn it down every 3 years. They just burn it, build it back up again. Sometimes family squabbles can be difficult. But Miles Horton was a great theorist of radical democratic education that resonates with our dear sister's sense of what it is to have critical consciousness and what it is to have courage. The saddest thing of our institutes of higher learning is that people are told to be smart and successful, not wise and great, and not wise and faithful, something bigger than themselves. So just to the highest compliment almost, ooh, she's so smart. That don't mean that much. Nazis had smart folk. What are you using it for? Oh, they're going to be successful. Successful what? Donald Trump? Highly successful. Not the kind of brother I won't spend a lot of time with. I mean, I pray for him. I'm a Christian, try to love everybody, you know. What does success mean? Those are the kind of questions that I think are so very important in terms of deeper conceptions of education. But there were some other hands.
Thank you for speaking with us. I really loved your part of the presentation, about looking back and reading things that have been written and how we can reflect on them and interpret them. Personally, when you were doing your whole speech, I couldn't help but think of Kostya's Struggle and the Seagull by Chekhov. I think it just relates so much about trying to be an individual in this realm of sleepwalkers. And so my question for you is, looking at what's happening now today, who do you think are some writers, artists, musicians, theorists theorists of the flame, as you put it, who do you think are some people that we can look to as our contemporaries who are doing this sort of work?
Wonderful question. And I'm so glad you invoked my favorite literary artist of all time, even beyond Shakespeare, is Anton himself. Anton Chekhov is just beyond descriptions, a league all by himself. He is the most humane, kind, gentle, loving, sweet. Most geniuses you don't want to spend a lot of time with. Anton wouldn't be a problem at all. He's a deep Democrat, of course. He's the only of the great Russian writers whose ancestors were slaves. Tolstoy was a count, towering genius. Dostoevsky, upper middle class, towering genius. Chekhov's grandfather was a serf. Serfs were not emancipated until 1861, just 2 years before American slaves were emancipated. But Chekhov had that sense of hypersensitivity to poor people and willing to tell the truth. And most importantly, he was honest. See, we live in a culture where honesty is a liability. It's almost subversive. And you believe in integrity, not perfection, but integrity. He was a medical doctor, so he only wrote at night. He served the poor during the day for free. And he wrote the greatest 4 plays that we have in the last 130 years at night. Spare. Just on the side, Good God, Anton, and he dies at 44. So, tuberculosis spent that blood at 28. 16 years of his life, he spent that blood every day. So he was on intimate terms with mortality, and his dance with mortality was characterized by deep witness bearing. So Chekhov is someone, of course, the footnote to Chekhov is Beckett. There is no Beckett without Chekhov. Waiting for Godot was a rewriting of Three Sisters, waiting to go to Moscow. It's quite explicit about that, but our Irish brothers and sisters part of a similar tradition, wrestling with oppressed peoples who tell the truth. The greatest playwright in America was an Irish brother named what? Eugene O'Neill. Iceman Cometh, Long Day's Journey. And I say all that to say, when we look in the past, it's our artists. I mentioned, Du Bois and the others in terms of scholars, but it's our artists we have to be in close contact with. Tony Kushner's, and I'm not thinking of Kushner of Lincoln, even though that's probably what he'll be most popular for, writing the script for the Spielberg film. But the plays of Tony Kushner. Kushner, is he a DSA? He's been in so many of our conferences.
Not off the top of my head, I don't think so.
We've got to get to Brother Tony. Because I've been on many panels with him, in the larger DSA sponsored events, because he's a democratic socialist. He's a Jewish brother who grew up in Jim Crow, Louisiana. So it's a fascinating perspective. It's not Brooklyn, not Lower East Side, not Philadelphia. It's Baton Rouge, Louisiana. How many synagogues they got in Baton Rouge? 2 or 3 on the outskirts, given the vicious anti-Semitism associated with my own tradition. The Christian tradition has been shot through with so much Jewish hatred that you have to perennially call that into question. But in terms of contemporary writers, Naomi Klein is somebody who I try to read. I'm talking about, younger, because I read Chomsky and the others, of course. Zaid, Harrington, who would be some others? Somebody shout it out. Howard Zinn. But of the younger generation, Brother Howard's gone. We love him. Michelle Alexander, yes. New Jim Crow. Oh, yes, absolutely. Who would be some others? Who's that?
Oscar Sankara.
Sankara.
Jacobin Magazine.
He's one of our people.
Oh, I see. I got to catch up on that myself. All right, that's that.
Philip Roth, too.
Pardon?
Philip Roth.
Philip Roth, Francis Fox Piven, I mean, it's true. Yes. And I tell you, David Foster Wallace was worth wrestling with. Suicide is sad and tragic, but he was a towering literary figure. Towering literary figure, indeed. But the fact is that, you know, once you decide to become a democratic socialist, there's two things. An unorganized socialist is a contradiction in terms. I'm a socialist. What organization? Just me, myself, and I. No. You just have a moral sensitivity at this point. You got to be connected, something. A network, organization, something. But the second thing is you also embarked on a magnificent adventure in the life of the mind. There's nothing anti-intellectualist about being a democratic socialist. I mean, you have to read more because the arguments coming at you are going to be intense and rapid from your friends, trying to disaggregate the myths and the lies about socialism, and why no one ought to even take it seriously, why no one ought to be even associated with the socialist tradition, ... But next question.
Thank you very much. To me, the biggest problem that threatens our democracy is the money in politics. I think it's the biggest concern from people of both parties. So I just was wondering if you could comment on that and you know, your thoughts, what we can do about it. Seems like an impossible task at this point to get it out, but I was just wondering what you thought about it and, you know, some solutions.
This piece, I think, was in The Nation the other night, where there's now new attempts to come together across political ideological lines for campaign finance reform. I don't think it was mentioned in the speech, though, was it? No reference whatsoever to it.
Just a voting.
Right, voting repression, suppression, but not the campaign finance reform. I mean, for me, it's one of the saddest features because it raises the most terrifying question for any democratic socialist, namely, what makes us think that American democracy has the capacity to revitalize and regenerate itself? There is an audacity about being a democratic socialist. We really believe, we make a Pascalian wager on the capacities of ordinary people to wake up, lift their voice, and shape their destiny. And the thing about campaign finance reform is you get the sense that it's like a reptile biting its tail, so that the possibilities of it seem to be held at arm's length by both parties, even when the vast majority of Americans want it. Every poll, even Republicans want it. But the domination of big money by the politicians in Congress, of politicians in Congress, is such that even the will of the people is held at arm's length over and over and over and over again. You say, well, wait a minute. Is it not the case that campaign finance reform is the precondition for any revitalization of American democracy? And that's the one thing that both parties have a bipartisan consensus on not responding to? Now, that is, it's almost time for the American Gibbon to make an entrance, right? Gibbon declined, the fall and decline and fall of the Roman Empire. And the American Gibbon, the decline and fall of the American Empire. When a society just reaches a point, it will not regenerate itself. It will not stay in contact with the best of what produced it, and thinks that it can just keep going on doing what it does. Now that's a scary thought. And that's why I always raise the existential issues, which is to say, we have to decide what kind of human beings we're going to be no matter what the situation is. And that's very important. That's why Chekhov is very important. When Beckett says, try again, fail again, fail better. Try again, fail again, fail better. That's Beckett. Which is to say, even if we're living in the last days of the empire, we're going to go out with a smile because we're going to try to be democratic socialists all the way down because we believe that's the best way of being human at a moral and political and for some of us spiritual level. Boom. Period. Take me to the worms. Ready to die. Got my cemetery clothes on. Coffin ready. What kind of person you gonna be? Right? That's what artists raise the same question, right? I got to sing my song. I got to blow my horn, Coltrane said. Do you have a hand up yet?
Hi, thank you. I have a question I've been kind of grappling with. I'm kind of curious on strategies of confronting and delegitimizing leaders in the United States who are perceived as being above law or even above morality, whether it be banks that are too big to fail and thus too big to go to trial, or military drone strikes that aren't accountable on any judicial level or judicial oversight. And also within a war that necessarily has no geographical bounds, it seems as if these leaders have espoused themselves to be deities that are kind of untouchable by common people and thus unquestionable. I'm kind of having a hard way of figuring out strategies to kind of organize and kind of build a movement to attack and successfully eradicate that.
My dear brother, you have raised two $64,000 questions, and I need some water on that. It's true, because it raises the issue of, can there be democratic accountability of political elites, of Wall Street elites, of our oligarchs and plutocrats? I'm about to drink the microphone. I think the first thing is, we have to have courageous people to say that we're telling the truth about the lack of democratic accountability because we're concerned about something bigger than us. And in telling that truth, it's going to radically unsettle people, especially when some of these individuals have themselves been almost deified. You know? So it's going to hurt some folk. And you tell them, sometimes the truth hurts. And every truth that doesn't hurt is probably not a truth. But it'll hurt us too. Because in telling the truth, we say it almost with tears in our eyes. Look, the lack of accountability of executive order or Congress or Wall Street or whatever, you see, connects with me, and I am capable of doing things that they are capable of doing without accountability. The democratic accountability means self-criticism as well as criticism of other selves. And I think the more we talk about it openly, candidly, honestly, passionately, the more it reshapes the climate of opinion. Because I do think that 12 months from now, when we come back together, same place, same time, hope we all live long enough to make it, that the discourse, for example, around drones will be different 12 months from now. Because many of us have been talking about drones for many, many years. And we're viewed as just so out of touch. I mean, people just walk up to you, get off the crack pipe, Brother West. Get off the crack pipe. Get off that crack pipe, Brother West. I'm not on the pipe. Don't try to convince me I'm out of touch with reality just because you have a truncated conception of reality. You know, sooner or later, the chickens come home to roost. You're going to reap what you sow. Sooner or later. You see what I mean? And the same is true in terms of Wall Street criminality. More and more. You read Charles Ferguson's book? The book you want to check out. Very much on Wall Street criminality. Charles Ferguson. He made the film called Inside Job. Anybody see that film? Inside Job. You saw that. That was powerful. Matt Damon did the commentary. Matt Damon did the commentary. Remember they interviewed the brother from Columbia? Yeah, exactly. Glenn Hubbard, exactly. The Bush economic advisor and so forth. And that's Charles just raising the question. And probably 5 or 10 years from now, it'd be more popular, but in the next 12 months or so. So it'd be very important that we all raise our voices about this lack of democratic accountability and say, it's a principled critique. It's a critique based on, justice for all and freedom for everybody. Do you find that you're getting traction when you talk about this?
It seems as if when I discuss it with other people, they find some way, especially with the military actions, to justify it in some
rationalization.
Yes.
Yeah. But let me ask this though: that if it were taking place under George Bush, it could be easier to
way easier, like unquestionably.
Exactly. Let me see. That's the thing that, good God Almighty. Actions are action, deeds are deeds. We go here and then we go to our dear sister right here. You'll be right back.
All right, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about socialism as a historically white and middle class movement and exclusion of people of color and lower class from that movement.
Well, of course, when you talk globally, I mean, socialism has probably been much more a matter of chocolate sides of the globe than vanilla sides. Just with China itself, that's a huge chocolate slice right there, you know, a billion tiny. But it's true that socialism emerged out of the heart of Europe as an ideal analysis and practice and so on, responding to where capitalism was most concentrated. Of course, the capitalist takeoff begins in Britain, right, with the Lancashire mills and the cotton production tied to the picking of cotton in the southern part of the United States. So it's very much a European affair in terms of its critique within its spreads. In the United States, it is true that socialism became much more a affair of white brothers and sisters. And that's partly because for so long, you know, we both had slavery, and then the stigma of being black in America was almost in and of itself a crime. So to be black and communist was just asking for, you know, just destruction. That's why Angela Davis was such a hero, that she was one of the first to really stand up and just say, public on television, because you had black communists before, Harry Hayward and others, but not on television. But a fro, black and communist. And most Americans said, oh my gosh, you don't believe in God, it's the end of the world. Yes, I'm an atheist too. Whoa. Even black Christians like myself went in deep prayer for the sister, you know. So, Angela, I'll give you a hug. And we worked at the Black Panther Party together, but I was on the Christian side, she was on the second side. But it was that stigma of being communist, because America early on, the Palmer raids in the 19-teens against socialists. The mayors of Oklahoma City and other places, right up here in Schenectady, New York, taken to jail and so on. And then the McCarthyism of the 50s. So that stigma was one that people held at arm's length. The Paul Ropes and the W.B. Du Bois were black communists, but it was very, very courageous and rare in that way. But it's true in the United States, people tend to associate socialists with white and even middle class. But there's been a large number of trade union activists who are part of the socialist movement who are white.
Is socialism in a way of privilege?
Is it a privilege? No, I don't think so. I think it's a choice, it's a decision. But it depends on what you're exposed to. What you're exposed to, but I don't think it's a privilege at all. And in fact, for serious socialists, it's a deprivileging. Like Norman Thomas, who I talked about, Phi Beta Kappa, Princeton, Union Theological Seminary. When he was offered a church on Park Avenue, the huge Presbyterian church on Park Avenue, he decided to go. He went to the settlement in East Harlem. And no one can understand why he was committing that kind of class suicide. Because with Princeton and his teacher, in fact, when they asked Woodrow Wilson, who was your favorite student? Who was the most brilliant student you ever taught? He said Norman Thomas. Because Woodrow Wilson was teaching at Princeton when Norman Thomas was an undergrad. So that he would get invitations to the White House, and they would just sit there and just look at him like, wow, you gave up all of that, Norman, to struggle with these poor people. What's wrong with you? And he would look at them and say, I have more joy than you do. But I'm doing what I'm really called to do. You see what I mean? So you commit the kind of class suicide. People just say that even about FDR was not a socialist. But when he said, economic royalist, I cherish your enmity. You hate me and I know it. Bring it on. Now he's talking about his friends he grew up with in Hyde Park. He's upper class. Upstate New York, right? But that's courage. And those kind of white socialists, that's like almost John Brown. Now that's quite, but that's close. John Brown was a white man who loved black people more than many black people love ourselves. He's willing to die for black folk. Unbelievable, brother. When Frederick Douglass met him, he said, he looks like a white man, but he carries the scars of a black man. How did he put it? He said, his soul has been burned by the iron of slavery without ever being a slave. That's what Frederick Douglass said about John Brown. That's why Malcolm X got back from Mecca. And he said, well, you left an organization, you said no white folk can join. That's what I believe then. What do you believe now? No white folk can join now. Really? Which ones? We start with John Brown. That's Malcolm, 1964.
Thank you so much. I noticed that you're emphasizing knowing the past and knowing the theory, know those things. And I find that in the activist community, maybe it's an American cultural thing, we're very reactionary to things, rather than planting the small seeds that grow outward and then take root. I'm thinking specifically during the civil rights movement, the leadership circles, or even the migrant workers reform, having meetings in their house and then saying, okay, bring 5 more people to your house and then 5 more from your house, and it growing from a small circle out. So, I think knowing the past tactics too for organizing is important, just as knowing the people that were thinking about the theory. So, when we're talking about campaign finance reform, starting now, telling people that this needs to change and planning to be somewhere in a massive scale, a march on Washington, D.C. to demand these things from the powers that be, but starting 2 years ahead of time and saying we're all going to be there. It makes leaving a job or skipping class or, finding a babysitter that much easier if you know thousands of other people are going to be there in solidarity with you.
No, I agree wholeheartedly there. And in fact, even when we talk about Sankofa Bird, we don't want to confine it just to the theorists or even the artists, but the tacticians and the strategists, which is oftentimes those are local activists, but oftentimes they are older, getting older, getting older. You want to keep that chain in place. Absolutely. Absolutely. Indeed. Yes, there's a... We got here.
Thank you, Professor, for coming and talk with us. I had a question regarding sort of race and media. Now, how do you do stereotypes that have been portrayed since the minstrel shows, Birth of a Nation, and even with blaxploitation with the portrayal of a strong male African American? So what I wanted to know from you is how would we go about changing those kind of perceptions? Because Spike Lee said himself that any film that he made wouldn't be able to undo what Birth of a Nation did. So my question to you is, how would we go about to try changing that?
I think a lot of it has to do with this conception of education. Because you're always going to get the sexist and the anti-Arab, anti-Jewish, anti-women, anti-gay, anti-lesbian stereotypes projected. But if we have an audience that has critical consciousness, you can deconstruct it, disaggregate it, and demystify it. Now, it would also be nice to have artists who are in contact with the humanity of the characters they're presenting. Back to Chekhov again. I mean, you can't get too far on Chekhov. You really can't. But it's a matter of complexity, trying to introduce complexity, ambiguity. It's like the difference between a Roger Hammerstein musical and Sondheim. All three were giants. Rogers, Hammerstein, kind of paper mache characters, like in Oklahoma, Then you get to Sondheim, humanity flowing, company, folly, Sweeney Todd, passion. How do we have artists who can project the humanity of our indigenous brothers and sisters? And of course, that's in some ways the litmus test, and we are nowhere near that. Nowhere near that. Or the litmus test of our Filipinos. Anybody ever seen a film of the 1 million Filipinos killed by U.S. soldiers in the 1890s? Not big in memory. But if you're Filipino, you do. See what I mean? So not even first subject matter, then keeping track of humanity. So if we just get the stereotypes, then we need people who either don't go or people who are sitting in their living room saying that is flat as a pancake. That is so narrow. That's not making a contribution to wrestling with what it means to be human, what it means to be democratic, what it means to be free. And so we got a lot of education to do in terms of the consumption side, and on the production side, we need better artists. But of course, they've got oligarchic and plutocratic control of Hollywood there, so it's hard to make your way through. You see, Paideia can make it through. Oh, come on, we need another Paideia. One more. We got 115 now. Okay, 16, 17, 18, 19. Keep that stereotype going, But there are a number of artists who do break that. I don't want to suggest that there's not any at all. But this issue of stereotypes is very, very real, very real. There was a sister who'd been very patient. Where is she? Yes, she is.
Thanks a lot. I wanted to ask sort of a personal question because you've been doing this a lot longer than the rest of us. And I lost my brother 2 years ago from an accidental overdose, which I see sort of as like a real personal face of injustice of class, of being working class. I don't think it's necessarily unique. It's part of working class experience, I think. But I was wondering if you had like moments in your own life where you were sort of disillusioned with politics. You sort of lost hope. You sort of, sort of like existential crisis when you face sort of great loss. And I was wondering how you recover from that.
Wow, that's a deep one, I'm telling you. That's a deep one. That see, when I call myself a blues man in the life of the mind, the blues makes catastrophic consciousness an intimate companion every day. Chekhov talks about the steady ache of misery in everyday life, in the quotidian. So you don't just have, a catastrophe over here on the edge of your life. It's already integral to. Like the blues folks say, woke up this morning with the blues. I gotta sing the blues to fight the blues off, right? And that's very much the kind of person I am, which means that you can have a sad soul with a cheerful disposition, with a smile and a little style, but recognize, given the level of suffering in the world, you could collapse at any moment. And the only thing that keeps me from collapsing or going to the crack house is the Sankofa, all the love that I've received, all the magnificent gifts that I've received, and whatever little gifts I have, I want to try to use it in such a way that when the worms do welcome me, at least I can go out with a sense of joy and feeling I've tried to do what I've tried to do. It was a wonderful essay by the great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, wrote in 1942, Analysis of Piety. And by piety, he's talking about those to whom we are indebted that shape us, like your mamas, for example. You all acknowledge you got deep debts to your mama, right? So the whole American talk about being self-made gotta be a lie because you didn't birth yourself. But Heschel ends that powerful essay where he says the pious person, for the pious person, it's a privilege to die because of the life you try to lead connected to compassion, sensitivity, but you refuse to be callous to catastrophe of whatever sort. Existential catastrophe, death of a beloved brother, or political catastrophe, U.S. Congress. Dysfunctional, legalized bribery, normalized corruption. Other than Bernie Sanders and one or two others, but generally speaking, or economic catastrophe, every day already in poor communities, poor Appalachian, white brothers, Asian, Laos, Laotians, and so forth. Refuse to be indifferent to criminality. And of course, you all growing up, at the time we were making a joke over lunch. In 1976, Gerald Ford comes on TV and says, America must never again and under no conditions engage in assassinating other people from other countries. Now you all live in a time when Gerald Ford is on the cutting edge for social justice and freedom. Oh, that's a low moment, isn't it? That's a nadir of grand proportion. You can invoke Gerald Ford and make him look revolutionary. Now see, I grew up at a time when I see my older brother, he's old school too. He understands the 60s and the 70s, where the norm has shifted so far to the indifference to form of criminality. I mean, we had debates about solitary confinement, which is a form of torture. Do you know how many folk are in solitary confinement this very moment in the United States, all of them undergoing torture? It's unbelievable. It's that shift, that callousness, that coldness, that chilliness, the indifference toward other people, especially the weak and vulnerable. And so in that sense, you really need more moral and spiritual fortitude than someone like myself who grew up at a time where the norm was different. It was just a very different moment. It was the Ice Age had not set in. You all been living in 30-something years. The class war from above against poor and working people. Forms of criminality have become accepted as somehow the way things are. My God. I mean, Brother Martin compared poverty in one of those speeches in '66, I remember. He said poverty is like, for him, cannibalism. Just as barbaric, just as bestial. But yeah, we get the point, Martin. If somebody said that today on television, what would they say? What would people say? He lost his mind. It's crazy. Poverty is part and parcel of the way capitalism is, because you have to be personally responsible. Bring yourself up by your own bootstraps, and if you fail, we're sorry about that. Doesn't hold for banks, but doesn't hold for Wall Street. Get subsidies, interest-free loans, students, loans. Wouldn't it be nice if students could get the same relatively interest-free loans that big banks on Wall Street got? So far, $7.9 trillion in running from the Fed. Even Ron Paul gets excited about that. His critique of the Fed.
I wouldn't want to be blamed for tripping Dr. West. No, I really watched a couple of the live streams, one of the live streams from your poverty tour this summer, and I would just ask if you could talk about some highlights that, for what you learned along that with Tavis Milo.
It was actually quite a inspiring thing. I had told Brother, it was Brother Tavis's idea. I told him that I would go on only under one condition, that we start on an Indian reservation. And we want to take all the cameras with us. So all the cameras that we'd had when we slept with the homeless black brothers and sisters in Washington, D.C., same cameras would be there on the reservation. Same cameras would be there in Appalachia. Same cameras would be there with the Laotians and Wisconsin. So that we had an exposure of just how widespread and multiracial the issue of poverty is. Because poverty is so color-coded, and people think, well, it's just on this side of town. One of the things that hit us probably, one of the things that hit me was the extent to which former middle-class people were living in poverty. People who had lost their homes especially, and living in their cars. And that's a relatively invisible section of our precious poor citizens. Because you've got the permanently poor, then you've got the new poor, former middle class oftentimes. And Barbara Enright had already talked about this in Nickel and Dime. That's another for you whose text you want to read. She talked about this with great insight, Nickel and Dime. But that hit, and then the veterans who were poor. We spent a lot of time with veterans who were poor. Just completely forgotten. Put in many, many years fighting for the country, fighting for the empire. And just outdangling. I was in Ann Arbor yesterday at the Michigan Theater. We had a huge conference on how to become unstuck, how to revitalize social movements, become unstuck. And we had a number of people from the tent city. There was a tent city right outside of Ann Arbor on 94 that we spent the whole day with. And some of them were, they shut it down, the police shut it down about 7 months later. And some of them were there to tell their stories of how they were trying to make it, because Michigan is now in a very deep reactionary mode at the top. Total cutbacks and so on. Not just in the automobile industry that people have said it's come back so strong, but after the contracts were completely restructured, wages pushed down, but we can't touch the contracts of Wall Street, can't touch executive compensation of Wall Street, again, arbitrary rule of law coming out of Washington. But we were inspired by the fight back. inspired by the fight back, and especially among young people. Especially among young. We had a meeting in Philadelphia where we had something like 13 organizations of young people. Color to Change, I mean, all these different groups. It was magnificent to and we, for the most part, we just allowed their voices to be heard. I hadn't heard of a number of these groups at all. And that's a sign of hope. Because hope is about motion. Hope is about movement. As long as you stay in motion, you keep doing, and you're with people in motion. And the young folk, many young folk in motion, that's a sign of hope for somebody like myself, who was much older now.
Hello, thank you. I'm curious about when did corruption become the norm in this country with politics and the government? When did this great upper wealthy class, this faceless creature that's in our government, when did that happen? And when did we accept it? Not necessarily accept it, but we just stopped fighting it very openly.
Thank you so much for your question. I think that one place to begin is Howard Zinn's history, people's history of the USA. Because corruption is not a new thing. It goes all the way back. All the way back. You all heard of Stanford University. Who was Leland Stanford Sr.? Railroad magnate. He named it after his son who died. So it's Leland Stanford Jr. You heard of Vanderbilt. Who was Vanderbilt? Cornelius. You can see a huge statue right here in New York. Magnate. They used to call them the robber barons. It's not a compliment. Oh, no, these are some gangsters. Oh, it's true. It's true. And that's just in the 1890s. You can go back further than that. But your crucial question is that it's not just constant. There's been attempts to cut back against the corruption. That's what the progressive movement was about at the turn of the century. What the populist movement was about. Trade union movement at the turn of the century. And you push it back, then it comes back again. 1920s. Calvin Coolidge. Interesting character. Naps every afternoon. Prolonged naps. But scandals, corruption, and so forth, you see. So that the history is one that you can see it going all the way back. In the 1960s, deep critiques of corruption. Why? Watergate is highly embarrassing. And lo and behold, the politicians get on fire. Oh my God, we've got to root out this corruption. We get the church report, the so-and-so report, so-and-so report. Set in various mechanisms of regulation. They work for a while. Uh-oh, here it comes back again. You see what I mean? So it sways back and forth, and so much depends on the strength. Social movements, political movements, reformers, courage, vision, imagination, service. Definitely. But that's just the beginning of the question. But I will start with Zinn's people's history. And don't stop there, but it's a big book, so it's going to take a while, man. It's going to take a while. But you read that text and then connect it to various footnotes to see the various forms of corruption, how it was beaten back, and then it comes back again, beaten back. And look at now with the Dodd, what's the name of that bill? The Dodd-Frank bill. Oh, now we're going to regulate Wall Street. Oh, we're going to finally have some transparency. How long ago was that? Almost 2.5 years. Still rewriting the law. Who's rewriting the law? Working people? Poor people? Those smart lawyers from Harvard, Yale, not Princeton. Princeton has no law school. We're going to Princeton undergrad, not Princeton law. Right? Those smart lawyers rewriting it so that the corruption still seeps through, even though you're supposed to have regulation. In the 1890s with the populist movement, we had antitrust laws. We had the Sherman Act. Yet the robber barons still were not affected. He said, well, wait a minute, what's on paper? The robber baron said, oh, it's just on paper, you can't enforce it. You think I'm affected just by what's on paper? That's like saying black people can vote in 1867. How come they get lynched all the time? It's just on paper. you enforce this thing concretely on the ground? There's the issue of movement. Issue of movement. So your question is a very important question, my dear sister, in terms of how we keep track of this. But we want historical context, and we want text and books that give us some sense of that historical context. Go all the way in the back, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Dr. West. I currently work as a 6th grade teacher up in the Bronx, and I just want to raise a question regarding the 2008 financial crisis and draw some parallels between this human-made financial storm effect and the 2 storms that the Northeast has experienced over the last year, who arguably could be said are also man-made in their causal origins through climate change and whatnot. And I find that one of the most pressing lessons of these natural disasters is how it made relatively abstract problems and issues such as climate change quite tangible for in very direct circumstances for millions of Americans. In likewise fashion, the 2008 financial crisis made very tangible the sort of corruption that became the status quo and the norm through which Wall Street operated for decades on end. Yet, the lessons that the people of the United States were able to draw from them were rather quite limited. Instead, a lack of accountability came to define the response to this man-made disaster, and furthermore, a gross lack of accountability that you continually raise. What lessons can we draw from this lackluster response to the 2008 financial crisis, given how it's turned out since then? Increased austerity, increased lack of accountability. What lessons can we draw?
Appreciate that one, though. That part of it is that there's going to be a weak wheel for democratic accountability as long as people are asleep. The kind of awakening that this gathering is all about, and the broadening of that awakening, constitutes the countervailing force against that weak wheel to democratic accountability. Because what we're talking about is such a thick conception of democratic accountability that it's hardly even accessible and available to large numbers of our fellow citizens. They hardly even get exposed to it. They may see it on Democracy Now! With Sister Amy. They may read about it, Black Agenda Report, or Counterpunch, or Common Dreams, or so. But for the most part, they're hardly getting exposed, right? They get a right-wing version in Fox News, echo chamber of Republican Party, and then you get the echo chamber of Democratic Party in the Obama administration with MSNBC. And people think, oh my God, we've got a wonderful conversation going on. No, you've got a truncated, emaciated public conversation going on. But you get right-wing in the center, that's about all most people get exposed to, you see. Whereas what we're talking about in this room, of course, is that, well, of course we know that MSNBC is better than Fox, but I mean, that's like saying that Pat Boone's better than his cousin. We want Curtis Mayfield. We want somebody who's getting down to the roots of things. We want somebody who's keeping it for real, right? And so what you say is so very true. And yet there's still others who are trying to broaden and deepen the conception of democratic accountability so that the lackluster response does not remain the only response. That's my weak response to your deep question.
Hi, Dr. West. Thank you very much. I was curious about your, given the passage of cannabis legalization in Washington State, Colorado, I wondered what you saw as the future of American drug policy as it relates to personal liberties and personal freedom and the medical use of cannabis and so forth.
I applaud the legalization of marijuana. I think the legalization of marijuana actually is, this even William Buckley argued this, and I'm not used to being in deep agreement with the late brother William Buckley in this regard. But I do applaud it. I think, in fact, that it's an opening because we got to get the money out of the drug world as a whole. And you start with marijuana, but so much of the civic terrorism in the streets of our cities, are tied to market upsets, big money, cartels linked to drugs. And you try to get as much money out as you can. That might in fact result in some minimizing of the kind of carnage that we've seen, you see. And it's a shift. I mean, who would have thought? Colorado as well as Washington.
So would you support full legalization of, say, cannabis?
I've got to ponder that one. I don't really have a position on that. I haven't thought as much as I should. Do you support it?
Oh, yeah.
You do definitely. Well, you look like a wise brother to me. I need to follow through on this. Let me think about that. Let me think about that.
Thank you, Dr. West. I was talking with a friend of mine from the Worcester YDS chapter. They weren't able to make it tonight. They had to leave early. I assume they send their regards. But what we were talking about was the idea that Christianity is fundamentally socialist in the sympathy for your fellow man. And earlier in your remarks, you mentioned how you had kind of broken with what's become the mainstream Christianity in our country. And I was also talking to my friend about the possibility of a teach-in or some kind of educational seminar about the tradition of Christian socialists and that particular take on the subject. And I was wondering, in your experience, what kind of angles should I pursue, what information should I present to establish that link between socialism and Christianity?
I've just been blessed actually to write forward for the most important book ever written by a Christian thinker in the 20th century. His name was Reinhold Niebuhr. He wrote a book in 1932 called Moral Man and Immoral Society. And he was a revolutionary Christian and a democratic socialist at that time. He and John Dewey actually worked together. Reinhold Niebuhr ran on the same socialist ticket Norman Thomas that same year, 1932. And John Dewey, who intellectually and philosophically they had deep disagreement. John Dewey is secular and pragmatist and so forth, but working within the Socialist Party. But this book, Moral Man and Moral Society, is the most important defense of a Christian defense of not just socialism, but even revolutionary violence in the Third World. It's an unbelievable text. Now, the same Niebuhr, of course, would become a bit more deodorized as he moved closer to the establishment. But this is the young Niebuhr on fire. He's teaching the same place where I teach now, Union Theological Seminary in 1932, he said. And I think in some ways you start with that text. And if you don't read that text, then you read a text by R.H. Tawney. He's one of the great Christian socialist thinkers in England. He wrote a book called The Acquisitive Society, another book just called Equality. But the two towering figures for a kind of intellectual discussion would be Niebuhr on the one hand and R.H. Tawney on the other. And Niebuhr's talking about linking Gandhi to, he has a wonderful section where he talks about the peculiar spiritual gift for black people is such that they could bring together the nonviolent strategy of Gandhi with their sense of responding to terrorism by not terrorizing others, but talking about love and justice. That might be a way forward. That's 1932. Young Martin Luther King Jr. read that text at Crozier Theological Seminary in 1950 and said, wow, Reinhold was prescient, not just prophetic. He might have something going on here. Deeply so. And of course, if Reinhold Niebuhr were alive as a young man, he'd be a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. As he got older, not necessarily matured, as he got older, he'd be a member of the Democratic Party exclusively, not a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. Now we've got members of the Democratic Socialists of America who are members of the Democratic Party. That just reflects their complexity. But Niebuhr makes a move from Democratic Socialists to liberal. I should say Democratic Socialists to liberal. It's a drop. It's not evil, but it's a drop. Absolutely. But those are the two texts that I would begin with in that conversation.
Thanks, Dr. West. We talked a lot about, a lot of the problems we've been facing the last 30 years of neoliberalism. Do you think we're in a transformative period right now? A lot of people are saying that we are. We've had the Arab Spring, we've had Occupy Wall Street, Chile, Quebec, we've had all this. What do you think is special about now that we haven't had before?
One question, I think that we've got to give our Latin American brothers and sisters real credit for the relentless critique and the devastating indictment of neoliberal policies. Because in some ways, we're just catching up. There's only one country in the world right now where there's growing equality. Does anybody know what country that is? Brazil. The whole rest of the world is growing inequality. Lula and company push through growing equality. It's still capitalist. It's still dealing with the American empire, cutting poverty in half, and so forth. So that the critique of neoliberal globalization, neoliberalism, and so on is now more and more widely accepted. That's important. That separates this particular moment from 25 years ago. It was strong in Latin America, but Europe, no. The States, very little. Asian export economies can't wait to become part of the neoliberal globalization and so forth and so on, you see. Now, where it goes is hard to say. The most important thing is the younger generation, more and more embracing, tied to their own situation, the student loans and so forth and so on. And that's a positive thing. That's a positive thing. But there's still a lot of confusion, and there's still a whole lot of desperation and capitulation on behalf of leaders to the neoliberal globalization project. I mean, one of the things about the speech, they talked about this new treaty with Europe. And the treaty with the Asian countries was already NATO on steroids. Now you're going to add more steroids with the transatlantic. That's the consolidation of neoliberal globalism. And Europe is deep trouble, now more open to it than ever, thinking somehow that's going to help them get out, given the misguided austerity program in Europe. And my God, we've got to pull for our precious Greek brothers and sisters. 30% unemployment, 55% among young Greek brothers and sisters your age. And yet they're fighting back. So that, yes, there is certain distinctive features, but it's just so hard to know which way it will go. Greece again is the fascist party in Greece, the neo-Nazi party in Greece. Now, what is it, 10%, 11%? And growing. And that's always been a challenge in the United States, of course, that for every democratic socialist, there's probably 10 Klansmen. The only difference is half of them are members of a militia group. Whereas I don't think you all have any militia groups you're working with. Let me know, just let me know. But that makes a difference, because militia groups, they kill folk like me and you. Probably get to me before they get to you. They will get to your house too after a while. But so the question is, you're living in a country where your right wing has that kind of weight. How do you proceed? This has been one of the very difficult things we've always had to deal with, the democratic socialists, because we have to support liberals inside, even given our critique of liberalism. Because if the alternative is not just conservatism, but a conservative party with a crypto-fascist wing to it, which is what the Republican Party is, then you end up even supporting war criminals like Barack Obama. You say, oh my God, he's committing war crimes, but compared to Romney, no, but you got to go to jail. Yeah, okay. Which state you live in? Which state do you live in? If you live in Florida, you might end up just saying a prayer for jail. If you live in Massachusetts, yes. Why? Because right-wing politics are vicious. It's ugly. And it has fascist implications, you see. And and so that's part of the tightrope that we walked, and I'm sure we've had these debates all the time. You all probably had the debate in the past election, right? Whether you go for a third-party candidate or not. Many of us went for Nader, many instances. I would do it again. But I did it with a consciousness that, you know, the right-wing folk of the Republican Party, if they're getting access to the White House, it's going to be even more catastrophic than the disaster that Barack Obama is. And disaster is better than catastrophe for progressives. Because the catastrophic rule of the right wing, just we wouldn't have this meeting if they really took over. And that's real. And Greece is understanding that with the right wing and the vicious, thuggish attacks on ordinary peoples and leftist politicians and so forth and so on. You see. And I'll say that as a black freedom fighter, this is very, very important because so many of my comrades have been in prison for 30 years. The brothers who I work with in the Panther Party, so they've been in prison for 30 years. We had Mumia Abu-Jamal, of course, just the interview last week on a radio show. And even that radio show, they want to take the interview, and are you sure you want to interview him, and so on, so on, so on. Because the attacks, the repressive apparatus, and COINTELPRO, and so these are very real coming out of the authoritarian side of our government. We might have just one last question, because I don't want to run too late.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Do you think we're seeing a resurgence of the progressive movement in American society, specifically with Senator Wyden's push for more openness on drones, with Senator Warren now being on the banking committee and really taking bankers, at least verbally, to task in recent hearings, and even with President Obama with his inaugural address in State of the Union, showing a shift to the left that was absent his campaign rhetoric, but really seems to be active currently in his political rhetoric.
I think we've got some evidence. The question is whether that's an evidence to allow us to infer it's a real resurgence. Let's call it a tilt. But a very important tilt. I mean, we look for anything. But it's a very important tilt. And it results not just because he's thought about it, but pressure. You know, Elizabeth Warren comes out of a strong support of liberals and progressives in Massachusetts and so forth. But yes, it is a tilt. And it is refreshing given the kind of suffocation that we've been wrestling with, given the obsession with deficits and austerity talk and so forth. But who's got a burning question? If you don't get it out, the rocks are going to cry out. My brother from Alabama.
Yes. Yeah, Dr. West. It's kind of that was one thing I wanted to talk about was just, you know, you were talking earlier about basically, if you're a socialist, you can't be me, myself, and I. And in somewhere like Alabama, we have, you know, we have a couple of Klan outposts, but we have no DSA chapters. And we have no, so what is it? I mean, I'm on a campus right now that is pretty reactionary, just as a student base, and it's very isolating. Do you have any kind of advice for how to avoid being burnout, as well as some advice for how to grow, you know, organization for the left in an area like that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I had that in mind in part when I was talking about the tilt between, you know, progressives versus right wing, or even socialists versus outright fascists. But one is that you remember this group. So now you got the internet and so forth. So you get this brother's internet address. Keep track of him. Make sure he's alive and breathing and strong. Absolutely. But then the South does have a rich tradition of progressives. It might be thin, but there's a strong, long, when I talk about Miles Horton, and I see Miles Horton, that's Tennessee now. And there's some Miles Horton like white brothers and sisters. There's some Rosa Parks like black brothers and sisters in Alabama. So you want to make sure you're connected with them, no matter how small. It just takes 2, 3, 4, 5. So you're looking for quality, not quantity. Definitely. And third, the books that you read and the conversation that you have, not just with progressives. Because keep in mind, the conversation that you have is not just among each other. That's one context, very important context. But you want to have context with some highly confused centrists. And some right-wing folk who have insights, but sometimes much too cold-hearted and mean-spirited. But the conversation must be robust across ideological and political lines. And so you got a lot of that heterogeneity in Alabama. Absolutely. No, indeed, indeed. One last question here. This is a talkative. Oh, my God, we'll be here all day. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I'm just curious, with the years and years of the entrenchment of the two-party system, progressive movements have gotten close. The populists, the progressives, the Socialist Party have all come almost, up to that threshold and then somehow fallen down, So it's just, back and forth and back and forth. So, and so it's like we're in a perpetual opposition mindset, So it's like if we were ever to, finally rise to, take the mantle, then, what would we do? What would we be, So, when are we going to actually have a Labor Party in America? When are we going to, be able to say, yeah, we have this victory finally after all these years?
Yeah, I don't have a real direct answer for that one. Trade unions only 7% of the private sector, so that Labor Party is not going to be too robust. I think it may and well be that folk in your generation come up with creative ways of transforming the two-party system in ways that we could not. There's parliamentary forms we can learn from Australia, we can learn from other countries. I mean, even if we followed Brazil and Australia and just said you have to pay money if you don't vote, that would change things, given the level of political apathy owing in part to a two-party system that so many people give up on, you see. But I don't think it will take the form of the old models, like Labor parties and so forth. And even Britain's Labor Party looks so much like the Democratic Party these days as Blair began to imitate Clinton, which is the blind leading the blind. And so but they did hold off the right wing, and the Thatcherite tradition was pushed back. But I don't have an answer to that question. I just don't know how. At the moment, we come up with a way that pulls the rug from under the two-party system, given back to the issue of campaign finance reform. I really don't. We just have to. We do remain oppositional and defensive, and all we have is social movement, social action. And keep in mind, I mean, this is one thing that we must never forget, because history is always full of surprises. It's just the history of rebellions. See, the only reason why I'm standing before you today as somebody who went to the schools that I went to was because of what, 65, Newark 67, Detroit 67, April 4th, 1968, what happened that day? Brother Martin was shot. What happened after he was shot? It's over 200 cities. It wasn't revolution. It was rage expressed. Protect the White House for the first time since the Civil War. Black folk were going to de-whitenize the White House. That's serious business. And you reach that point, and the elite say, I think we might have a problem. We can't reproduce our capital anymore. There's not enough social stability for my kids to go to school. We've got a problem. Let's integrate these Negroes. Not all of them. We're not talking about Jamal and Letitia. We started with Johnny and Susie Johnson. Bring in the black middle class. Try to create that black middle class, so maybe they'll become indifferent to Brother Jamal and Letitia. Make sure that they're tied to the big banks and the big corporations and the fine schools and so forth. But of course, there is no Susan or Cornel going to college without my brothers and sisters dying for something that they couldn't benefit from. That's another reason why remembrance is important. Because I'll never forget them. Never, ever, ever. Look at my first grade picture There's 14 black brothers in that picture. I'm the only brother still alive from that picture. The worms got the 13 of them. Starvale, all my close partners, Irvin. I'll never forget those brothers. Ever. No matter where I am. Germany, Paris, St. Francis College, Brooklyn, Young Democratic Socialists of America. The tradition goes on. Thank you all so very much. Stay strong, stay strong, stay strong. You're doing wonderful work. Thanks so much, Sister Maria, Brother Matt, Sister Beth, Brother Chris on the Democratic left.